Hey there, kiddos, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Uncle Frank. I'm that you are having a great day, and in today's video, I'm going to be sitting back in my very squeaky chair, relaxing and having a little conversation with all of you guys about change and how you should be prepared for change and how important I think it is that you're ready to take advantage of it. Be adaptable, because adaptability, I think, is super important in general, not just in the world of collectibles and cardboard and all that jazz. Just in general, I think adaptability is a good thing because being able to take advantage of shifting trends and shifting times is a good thing. And finding yourself inflexible when the times change, finding yourself stuck in your ways when those ways no longer work, can be a serious hindrance to your success in other changes. So let's talk about that for a bit. Let's talk about trends and time and changes and all that while I move some stuff around over here. You know, I think it was the 1840s, late 1840s was when the Californian gold rush began. You know, some flakes of gold found in a creek one afternoon led to this absolute crazy rush of people out west, American settlers heading into a new territory to strike it rich and find their fortunes out in the Californian hills. And this gold rush was its own industry for a bit, without cars looking through. And with that industry came mining towns. Mining towns that existed largely to support the miners who were out there in the hills digging up any precious metals they could. These mining towns, they were centers of commerce and trade and the hub of all the motion, the traffic as the landscape changed around them from these miners ripping the very soil itself apart. And as the gold rush went on and fortunes were found and things turned out well for some people, these mining towns were thriving and they were icons of the industry, so to speak. But when the gold rush ended, and the gold rush did end, a lot of these towns struggled to find their footing in a changing landscape when the mines dried up, so to speak, when there was no more gold to be strung and found out in the panning and digging up out of the ground and all that jazz. When the miners left and the world moved on, these mining towns fell into decay almost overnight. And you hear about it all the time. You can find it in all sorts of history books and all sorts of maps and such. There's countless little towns and little farms and such of people who once upon a time thought that their little slice of the pie was going to last forever. It was going to be prosperous forever. And things changed. And they didn't adapt fast enough. And as a result, those towns, those once thriving, once rich mining towns, fell into ruin and disrepair and got abandoned. And they faded away. And this has a lot to do with the hobby world. Not just the gold rush aspect of it, but the fact that being inflexible and not being able to properly adapt to changing times, especially changing fads. Because the gold rush was a fad. Sure, it was a flight to fortune, so to speak, but it was a fad. A lot of people moved on once they had their shot at it. And you know, fads come and go, like hobbies. Hobbies are fads in some ways. And business that fails to adapt to changing trends, changing fads, can really find themselves behind, in some cases dead. I mean, I like to point at Toys R Us and Blockbuster's early change of the millennium businesses that really fell behind. I mean, Toys R Us really lagged when it came to bringing themselves into the digital ecosystem. You know, they worked through Amazon. They sold through a third party rather than trying to adapt themselves and bring their own expertise and their own website up to snuff, which really resulted in a loss of customers, which was catastrophic to them. Not understanding the digital landscape did a number on them. And something similar did happen with Blockbuster. They didn't really fully adapt digitally. There was the whole Netflix story that everyone's familiar with. And once upon a time, Blockbuster was a name brand that, well, every household had a Blockbuster video at some point, right? And nowadays they barely exist. Sure, there is still a store or two that I'm aware of that it's pretty cool that still happens, but Blockbuster, the brand Blockbuster, the franchise doesn't exist anymore, to my knowledge, which is a shame because they failed to change with the times. And there's also smaller examples, over time of not businesses that failed because of adaptations, but adaptations that forced changes. Skipping past the gold rush, a lot of stuff in the hobbies world, especially the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. The 80s themselves, the mid to late 80s had the sports card junk wax era where there was billions of packs of sports cards all over the place. Baseball cards were everywhere, and at the start of it, people thought they were sitting on piles of gold, but by the end of the decade, they realized they were holding on to shit. The Atari, the video game crash of the early 80s is another thing. There were so many Atari games out there of such low quality that the entire gaming landscape was flooded with them, to the point that it led to a general market crash as people completely lost interest in video games for a year or two. Crazy stuff. There was Pogs in the 90s, which were a craze for a bit, if you don't know. There was Beanie Babies. People banked on Beanie Babies. The Beanie Baby company, they did some manipulative stuff, and people bought into it, and they would leverage their houses and huge loans and lines of credit against these little stuffed animals. And for a bit, it worked. For all of these things, for a little bit, it worked. People who were there at the very beginning of the junk wax era, who were just getting into sports cards, the very start of the junk wax era, no one really knew how bad it was getting. Same thing with Atari. There were stores who would prop themselves up with Atari games. And that didn't work out so well, did it? There were stores that propped themselves up on sports cards, and that didn't work out so well. Same thing with Beanie Babies. Beanie Babies happened to coincide with the early days of the internet and eBay, where people could buy a Beanie Baby and then sell it online for quintuple the price because it was a rare Beanie Baby. And that came to a crashing halt soon too, when people lost interest in Beanie Babies because it turns out there were so many out there, and there was never really enough there was never enough demand to satisfy supply. And we've seen it in the card world too. The first 2 years of Magic the Gathering's life, you could not get enough Magic the Gathering cards. The alpha, beta, unlimited, revised sets were in high demand. Everyone wanted some because everyone was playing it, and those were some great sets. The Legends, the Dark, Antiquities, Arabian Nights. Stores from back then, they would put in their orders, call up their distributors, so to speak. They'd place their orders and try to get as much as they could, ordering as many boxes as they could, knowing full well that they actually wouldn't get nearly what they ordered because there was never enough to go around. And that all came to a stop. That came to a change in late 94 with Fallen Empires. Suddenly, stores placing orders for as many boxes as they could afford suddenly found themselves receiving all of those boxes because printing had caught up with demand. And yes, it happened to coincide with one of the less popular, less powerful sets, which resulted in a lot of misplaced anger and hatred towards Fallen Empires, I think. But it's a fact that changing times did put some stores out of business, because Fallen Empires did put some stores out of business. The 90s were a crazy time. A lot of new stuff was coming to market. Video games, the landscape for video games was changing. Retro gaming was only just starting to begin in the mid to late 90s, when people were looking at old retro games, Atari and the Commodore and such like that. And collectibles as a business was starting to really pop up too. eBay had popularized a lot of yard sale flipping. People would go to Granny's garage sale and pick out some cool stuff and throw it on eBay and make a quick buck. It was a very easy thing. If you were around back then, you had a very easy time of it. But the marketplace changed. The early adapters, the people who took to eBay instead of relying on selling things on their front porch or at a swap meet, those guys made a lot of money. And the people who failed to adapt to online platforms, like I said, Toys R Us and Blockbuster, so unfortunate they didn't have the biggest success. And markets change, and businesses have to adapt to those markets. And I'm not just talking about the big box places. I'm not talking about multi-million-dollar corporations. I'm talking about you guys, the buyers and sellers and the flippers. You know, markets change, and the people who don't adapt to those changes, or at least who don't try to adapt to the changes, they will fail. Because when the game you're playing shifts entirely and you don't know the new rules that you need to know to succeed, how do you plan on winning? If the price of boxes shifts dramatically in the negative because there's more available now than there was ever before, if we find ourselves in a chilling rain situation, a fusion strike situation again, battle styles and such like that, or Scarlet Violet base, if the Pokemon world changes again, and the people who are right now going out to Walmart and Target and all that jazz, buying up as much Pokemon in one piece as they can, if they're not able to get those easy returns, easy tendies, as some would say, do you think they're going to stay in the game? Do you think the game is going to stay the same? Don't bother answering it, because the answer is no. If the markets, when the markets shift, because they will shift. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not this decade. Could be in the 2030s for all I know. But when the markets change and the quick flippers, the short-sighted people fail to adapt, they're not going to stick around. They're not going to change their entire model around buying and selling at barely breaking even or a loss. But there's things that individual stores who are thinking the long term can do to stick around. I'm not just talking about buying and barely breaking even on that. There's other things you can do too. Aggressively purchasing inventory from people selling off collections, for instance. A lot of these people who are going to Kmart now and building up their huge collections of super impressive, high demand One Piece and Pokemon cards, well, they're not going to want that stuff once the market shifts and once the market turns. They're going to want to sell it. They're going to want whatever they can get for it. And some stores, myself included, I did this too. I'm very guilty of it. When the markets took a huge downturn, a lot of stores turned their noses up at these collections instead of buying everything they could on the cheap. And that was a mistake, absolutely, I believe. Because just like the market will turn and go down, it's going to go up again too at some point. Maybe in the 2040s, who knows? I couldn't possibly tell you. But what I'm really trying to say in this video is that things change. Things shift, and how business is done today is not necessarily how it will be done tomorrow. And that you have to be aware of that and have a plan in place for when the shift happens. I know what my plan is. Buy conservatively now, buy aggressively in the dip. But maybe that won't work. Maybe my plan will be flawed because there's something about the change that I don't really anticipate. Who knows? But being aware of the risks and the hell is that noise? I don't know what that was. That's a motorcycle. Being aware that change is going to happen sooner or later, whether you like it or not, is just it's just smart in my opinion. So this was a ramble video. Didn't really have a lesson here so much as, just be aware of the change. Be aware that change will come sooner or later, and you have to be prepared for it. You have to have a game plan for when the markets shift. And the game plan can't be, oh, I'm going to continue buying at Walmart and flipping on eBay. Because nobody is going to be buying product from you on eBay for more than what you paid at Walmart. That's just not going to happen. And they'd like to think that it will, but it won't. There won't be a in the big bear market of the future whenever it happens. You know, we're not going to have situations where you can go to Walmart, grab some ETBs, and then just flip them for an extra $50, $60, $70, $80. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to go to Walmart and you're going to see a wall of ETBs and you're going to go, I can't buy those because if I sell them online, I will lose $10 to $20 on the purchase itself. Crazy stuff. I don't know. Things change, but that's all I got for you kiddos today. Please like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. Check out the Discord, the Patreon, the TCG player. It's all there. And I'll see you guys next time with whatever it is I'm talking about then. Ciao.